this is actually happening. My name is Steve Moak, and I am the unlicensed counselor. We are coming to you live from Scottsdale, a little overcast and rainy Scottsdale, Arizona, if you can see out behind my shoulder on this kind of overcast day. Boy, I am so excited to bring this very first ever podcast of the Unlicensed Counselor directly to your ears. And thank you so much for tuning in. And please, if you like what you hear today, be sure to tell a friend. You know I'm going to need all the help I can get as we get this thing off the ground. But before we get started, a couple thank yous I want to push out to the world. First off, Star Worldwide. That's where I'm sitting here bringing this podcast live to you. Dave Pratt and team, thank you so much for having me. If you are looking to get into this, highly recommend sitting down with this team here to make it happen. They're the only reason I'm even going to look remotely good as I sit here and talk to you today. Also, two sponsors, believe it or not, for kicking off here. First one is a company called ShareTech. They have built the world's most innovative drug and alcohol screening. Look, if you're listening to the Unlicensed podcast, this podcast, you've probably been impacted by drug or alcohol addiction, substance use disorder, divorce, things like that. Oftentimes, you're going to be in the need of a drug test. Highly recommend ShareTech. Go to betterdrugtest.com. Check them out. Go ahead and order it today. I think you're going to be extremely happy with the results, accuracy, and the uncheatability of that drug and alcohol screening. And then on a different note, a company called Easy Sheets, actually based here in Scottsdale, Arizona as well, too. Easy Sheets is a subscription bedding service where we ship press sheets right to your door. So big thanks to everybody to help making this happen. So we were paying the bills. We've got that out of the way. What in the heck is this unlicensed podcast, and why am I certainly sitting here talking to you, and why should you pay any attention to me whatsoever? Couple things. So my name's Steve Moak. Lived here in Scottsdale, Arizona, 30-plus years. Been in the behavioral health world for 20-plus years. Now, what does the behavioral health world mean? It's a lot. It's a loaded question, and candidly, that's really the reason why I wanted to get into podcasting and specifically start talking about behavioral health. I am a person in long-term recovery from drug addiction. What you're going to hear from me is a lot of non-fluff terms. In the kind of woke side of the behavioral health world, we are seeing a lot of language around how drug and alcohol addiction is described and how words can stigmatize. And there is some merit to a lot of what is being discussed there, but there is a lot of BS that is also leading people into bad areas. Just because you're using the term substance use disorder instead of drug addict and things, I mean, is it making a difference? So before I get too far ranting and raving around what I'm going to be talking about, I want to talk about why the heck it's called the Unlicensed Podcast. So again, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I walked into the doors of a treatment center out here in Chandler, Arizona, 20-plus years ago, and I was a freshman in college. I grew up, went to Cocopah Middle School, Chaparral High School, and I was a good guy. People liked me. You know, you can send in and, at me at Instagram at the Unlicensed Counselor if you disagree with that, which I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that will. But I had a lot of good things going for me. I was coach. I was captain of the basketball team, track team, vice president of my class. I had a lot of really good stuff going for me. But what a lot of people didn't see on the other side of this thing was a full-blown addiction, right? That started out very early. I mean, started really my freshman year in high school. And we were on a trip over to Coronado Island, the Dell. I remember it vividly. And I was sitting in a room in the Dell with all the senior girls. They were like cheerleaders. I'm a 15-year-old kid. These girls were like beautiful, right? And some other people, and there was schnapps going around. I don't even know if schnapps still exist in any way, shape, or form anymore. But I remember taking a couple pulls off this root beer schnapps. And I wasn't a drinker or party or anything, but I was like, I would have literally done anything that these people, especially these girls in this room, had asked me to do. And before I knew it, there was what looked like a cigarette, right? Kind of circling the room. And I'm going, okay. And it comes to me, and they're like, take a hit. And I'm like, you got it. And sure enough, I did. And sure enough, I coughed like you've never heard somebody cough before. And that was the first time I took a hit of weed. I smoked a joint, right? And it stands out. And what's so interesting, it's like those little moments in time, right, where your life can kind of go this way or that way. And this was one of those little pivotal times where my life set out on a course that then led me down a very unique and interesting path that I never saw coming, right, that I never in a million years saw coming. So I went from captain of teams, well-liked teachers, students, parents, all that kind of stuff, to when I got back from this trip, I immediately started to seek out more of that, right? I wanted to find weed. I wanted to find more parties. I wanted to be a part of that world. And while I was doing that, all of a sudden, the things that I was interested in basketball, right, and track, and my friends, and being a decent student, I'm not going to oversell the student side of my academic career at Chaparral High School, but those started to fade, right? My peer group started to fade. My friends changed, my sleeping, eating, as I slowly started to ramp up into this new lifestyle, which at the time, looking back on it, you could say I was a full-blown drug addict, alcoholic by the time I was 16. So why am I sitting here telling you all this? Well, I'm trying to tell you a little bit about why I got into behavioral health, why I'm passionate about it, and hopefully by sharing some of this in all of the topics, you're going to hear me talk a lot about drug and alcohol addiction. That's not all we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about anxiety, depression, divorce. We're going to have some guests. We're going to do a lot of interviews. I've got some unbelievable people lined up. I've got some really interesting topics that we can talk about. But I'm sick of talking about behavioral health with kit gloves, right? That it's this nice little thing that happens. It's an industry that is lacking outcomes. It is an industry that is lining its own pocket because they get paid more when your son or daughter, husband or wife comes back and relapses for the 10th and 20th time. And that's just on the drug and alcohol addiction side of this. I know, I'm jumping around. It's my first podcast. Cut me a little slack, okay? Back to Chaparral. I go off into my senior year of high school, and there's only one place a good pot-smoking drunk wanted to go to college, and that was the University of Colorado at Boulder, right? That was my dream school. I went and looked at Pepperdine, went and looked at some of these other beautiful colleges that, trust me, my parents much would have preferred if me gone to those schools, but I had my mind dead set on only one place and one place only, and that was Boulder, Colorado. Well, I did that, right? I got to Boulder, Colorado. Evidently, there was a year that happened during that time, right? I did the fraternity thing. I got involved in that. But, I mean, if you think drinking and drug use, in high school was problematic, and it was, right? I mean, I was using a variety of drugs. I was getting in trouble. Curfew, suspended, grounded, just fighting police, and it was all heading that way. But then it's like, okay, maybe Steve will get it together when he goes off to college. Not quite the case. Get to Boulder, do the fraternity thing, and I'm not exaggerating here when I say that. It was a year of a blackout, right? I mean, this was a year that the drug use and alcohol use, if it was at a 10, it went to 100 in a very short period of time. Relationships deteriorated. The friends that I thought I had were falling off because I think even my drinking and drug use was scaring them. The drugs went from weed and mushrooms and things now to snorting cocaine and all of the other, kind of harder core drugs, quote unquote, that one might think you'd be doing at that time. And by the end of my freshman year, I was in a complete blackout. I was an unrecognizable person, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, just broke. My parents didn't want to have anything to do with me. I decided I wanted to spend the rest of that summer up in Boulder, Colorado, and I crashed and burned. My parents didn't want to have anything to do with me, but what they did say is, if you ever need help, call, right? They said, if you ever need help, call. And one day, in a half blackout stupor, I'm not exactly sure what ray of light shined down on me. I picked up the phone and I said, I need help. And they said, okay, we're going to get you on a plane back down here to Phoenix, and you're going right to rehab. I said, rehab? I'm 20 years old. I'm not even of legal age to be drinking yet. You want to send me off to rehab? And they're like, absolutely. Look, I was broke. I was sleeping on a couch in a fraternity house in Boulder, Colorado. I mean, I didn't have a lot of good things going for me, a lot of great options at the time. So I begrudgingly hopped on that plane. I landed, and they drove me straight to a place called Chandler Valley Hope. It was called Chandler Valley Hope at the time, now called Valley Hope. And that was the first time I was exposed to recovery, right? I got very into it, started to put together some really amazing things. But during that time, so trust me, this all ties back together, I promise. I got with my family. We found an organization called Not My Kid. Not My Kid is a nonprofit based here in Arizona, and it was really me, the kid who had all this exterior kind of good stuff going, but underneath was just kind of a shell of him and was using drugs and alcohol. The premise was that my kid wouldn't do that. My kid was X, Y, and Z, captain of this, it's student government involved, parents like, blah, blah, blah. Not my kid. And so I got together with my parents and a psychologist in town named Dr. Mark Rohde and founded this organization called Not My Kid. And the whole premise was, and this was my first exposure outside of rehab where there was a lot of good stuff, happening. And I did make a serious commitment and wanted to be sober because my life had just become so unmanageable. To go and share my story, kind of I'm giving you the abbreviated version right now. We'll fill in some more color as we get rolling into this podcast over the next couple episodes. But I wanted to take my story. I was 21 years old at the time and kind of go share it to local high schools, PTAs, parents, and basically anybody who would listen. And this is 1999, 2000, a little, I wouldn't say sobriety is cool now, but it's a little more talked about. 20 plus years ago, people were still hiding behind closed doors and not really sharing openly kind of the stories of their family and how this was impacting everybody. In every single place that I went, I would get pulled aside after every presentation and say, it's my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife. We're going through this exact same thing right now. What can I do? How can you help? So that was my first exposure to behavioral health, right? Now, fast forward to a slip, right? And we'll get off just the drugs and alcohol. But again, today's episode is to set the stage on who the heck this unlicensed counselor guy is. Why do I need to listen to this podcast? Will there be any value that you can even extract from this stinking podcast, going forward, and why I should even think about listening to episode 2. So I'm out at a party, as I would do. Just because you're sober doesn't mean you're not allowed to have fun. I think there's a big misconception about that, but I'm out with a lady friend. We go to a party. I order a Red Bull at the bar. This is 3.5 years into my recovery at the time. They hand me a glass, what looks like Red Bull. I proceed to drink it. It was not. It was Red Bull and vodka. Interesting. I did not set out for that at all. A couple things happened. No sirens went off. No balloons fell from the ceiling or a spotlight hit me saying, Steve, you're not allowed to, drink vodka. Nothing happened. And I had kind of drifted away from kind of the core recovery principles. Call it AA, call it whatever you want. Those are important things that help me kind of get along in my life. And I just wasn't walking the walk, right, at the time. And instead, what could have been a slip. So again, I already talked about those little moments in time where you could go this way or that way. What could have just been a slip. A slip is like, I had a drink. Crap. Okay, stop. Check in with somebody who cares about you. Call it a sponsor, call it a friend, call it a loved one, aunt, uncle, whoever it is, and say, hey, whoops, I did this. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go back down that route. I proceeded to choose option B. Option B was, I'll order another one because I like that feeling. And then I order another one and another. And then after, God knows, 8 drinks or so, probably 10, it is as if those 3.5 years never existed. I was immediately blacked out and drunk and woke up in dorm of a sorority girl that I was seeing at the time. So, that's how, like that. That's how quick that all came rushing back to me. And that one drink, I always tell people I've only had one relapse that just lasted a decade. And that one drink took out the next 10 years of my life. Look, did it crash and burn everything instantly when the vodka hit my lip? No. Alcoholism is a progressive thing. It progressed in my life. And eventually, all of those same places that I were as a 19-year-old kid sleeping on a couch in a fraternity in Boulder, Colorado, came back. Takes a little bit of time. Some people it doesn't. It does go a little bit faster. But for me, I thought, okay, I can control this now. I'm 23, 24 years old, had a nice job, was dating some nice girls. I said, okay, you know what? My story is, here's the story I'm going to tell people. I had a problem with cocaine. I didn't have a problem with alcohol. So when people would see me drinking now, I'd say, no. It wasn't alcohol that was a problem. It was the cocaine that was a problem. And then they go, oh, okay. Right? People want to believe you, right? Like they genuinely want to. So if you're telling that, and I sold that story well. I was good. I mean, I was a sales guy, and people tended to like me and wanted to believe me. And meanwhile, the drinking started increasing and increasing and increasing, and started dating a girl who I would eventually marry, but ultimately was my drinking buddy. And a great person, but she could always, and I get asked this question a lot. It's like, what makes somebody an alcoholic? Do you have to drink a gallon? Do you have to drink every day? And it's like, drinking in spite of consequences, right? Like, that's what I tell people is my definition of it, is if you keep running into stuff and you just keep drinking and clearly alcohol is a contributing factor to it, there's some problems there, right? Call it a problem drinker, call it an alcoholic. I don't really care, candidly, what you call it. But mine was continually becoming a problem. And I thought, okay, we gotta do something here. I didn't. And then I started smoking weed every day. And this is before weed is now legal and ubiquitous, and you can smell it everywhere you go when you're walking around town and things like that. So again, progress, kept kind of progressing and progressing. Ultimately, I get married and keep going, and the wife says enough is enough. I mean, it lasted maybe 2 years. She left, gone, see ya, bye. A lot of people can drink hard, even enjoy it, and then they can stop. And then there's the rest of us who can drink hard and want to keep going. I wasn't racking up DUIs. I wasn't, getting in trouble with law enforcement. I had my spats, but that wasn't it. I had a job. I was making good money, but my party never wanted to stop, right? And then after my wife left, I went on a 2-year run that, I'm not going to get big into the war story side of all this stuff, but we'll drip some in here as we get going. But I am writing a book about it, and let's just say we will put some of the meatier stuff into the book that was, strippers, drugs, the whole crap that you would think a person who's progressing down this path would go. Before I reached out, my parents wanted nothing to do with me again. They said, again, we don't want to talk to you. Only time you call us if you want help. And for some way, shape, or form, I reached out one day and asked for help. And they said, okay. And I was in a detox center the next day for about 5 days. And from that detox, went into a treatment center for 6 weeks. And that started really what is my new life today. So I'll put a pause in that for a minute. That was all happening here in Scottsdale, Arizona. That was me going to bars that are within a quarter mile or half mile from the chair that I'm sitting in right now. That's how I got into the behavioral health world. From this point forward, after this stay in a treatment center, which was called Sundance, which I don't think it exists anymore now, this is where I really, got into the behavioral health in a more professional way, right? I said, okay, I need to be doing more to help people. There's too many folks like me, and I feel like I have more to offer in the behavioral health side. So I enrolled in, I actually went to work at the treatment center. After I had a year of recovery, I went and worked at the treatment center. So it's really interesting, and I think it's informed a lot of my perspective on addiction in general, and just behavioral health and mental health as well. Because, you walk in the door with a drug addiction, but there's depression, there's anxiety, there's bipolar. I mean, it's, you're not just usually one thing when you walk in the door, right? But I'm big on patterns. And I saw so many patterns of folks who were coming in and what they would say and the BS that they would spend to us as the staff and the stuff that they're sneaking in and how they need to check themselves out and what the family members, like I just saw it. And once everybody thinks their story's so unique and nobody understands and I'm different. I've got money. I don't have money. I have this. I don't have that. Like it's all this. It's very similar. I can say it's all the same, but it's very similar. And when you've seen 150 people over the course of 18 months walk through the door of a treatment center, you kind of go, okay, all right, I see what's going on there, right? And you start to establish some of these patterns that you see. And that's really, I think, where a lot of my informed kind of perspective on behavioral health comes from, and mental health. So much so that I enrolled at GCU, Grand Canyon University, here in town. Obviously this podcast, it sounds local, but this is going to be over everywhere. And Grand Canyon University offers a master program. It's a 4-year program, right? Where, and look, I'm not the academic, right? I am an intelligent person. I am bright. I am nice. Grades, school, I can do it. Not my favorite. I like to do a lot of other stuff. And I said, you know what? I want to take this experience and I want to professionalize it, right? If that's a word. I just made it a word. So we'll just run with that. And enrolled at GCU and got into a counseling. And what you graduate with is an LAC, a licensed associate counselor, and then become an LPC, a licensed professional counselor. I wasn't in this to become a PhD or a psychologist or anything like that. That's way more work than I really felt like doing at the time. But I did think that, hey, I got this experience. It's an industry that I'm passionate about. Let's go and do this. And I worked my butt off to do that and actually got good grades. Surprised myself, candidly. But during this point in time, I ended up starting a business in the behavioral health world. That was kind of a startup thing that I ended up raising some money for. I got married. I had a child, all while I went from working in the treatment center to launching a startup to raising capital and getting married and also raising 2 stepkids at the time as well, too. It was a lot. So I get 3.5 years into this graduate program. I complete all of the required coursework, and the last 2 things that I have to do are the practicum. The practicum is where you go to a treatment center, you sit down, you actually do one-on-one or group counseling and things like that. And it was like 30 to 40 hours a week. And I'm going, I got a startup, I got a baby, I got a wife, I got 2 stepkids, you got investors who are up my, you know what. I mean, I had a lot going on at the time. And not drinking, staying sober. And this is, you know, a couple years after my last stint in the treatment center. And I just said, I'm going to have to put something on hold. In the graduate program that I had been going to for 5 hours a week for 3.5 years, writing essay after essay and tests and classes, which I really enjoyed, I had to be put on pause. And I had to come up for air, and I took a break. And I focused on the business, and I focused on my family. And that was probably about 2 years ago, which brings me to why I'm an unlicensed counselor, right? And look, I know a lot of people in the behavioral health field and counselors, psychologists are going to hear this and go, quack, BS, you know, don't listen to him, doesn't know what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. Fine. I went through all the same classes that all these other folks did, right? I understand the concepts behind it. I was working in a treatment center at the time. I understand, you know, a lot of what's going on in the mental and behavioral. Am I an expert? Expert? No. Do I have lived life experience combined with a graduate program that taught me what I need to know that can benefit people? You bet. And that's the long way of getting to what the heck the unlicensed counselor is. You know, so I've got all this experience, a lot of it in addiction, a lot of it in general mental and behavioral health. And I wanted to launch a podcast to start talking about the industry in general. I want to have some really interesting guests on that are probably contrarian to a lot of the trends that you're going to hear within the behavioral health world. You know, they are, you know, woke's a big word these days, and I hate to just throw it in, but candidly, that's just a lot of what it is. We're focused on a lot of the language and description and the victimization and the trauma. A lot of important stuff to unpack there, but what we have gotten away from is the solution, right? And what I'm here, what I want to talk about, what you can go to my website and book time with me is about solution-focused counseling. I don't know when the hell counseling got away from actually trying to solve the problems that you have. And I'm looking at the industry, and by the way, I've been in counseling my whole life too. I mean, trust me, I still need it. I still go. I got a lot of my own crap that I got to unpack, right? And I'm just looking at this going, they're taking me back to childhood. We're talking about my parents and how many times I moved and, you know, so there may be some trauma. Or you know what else may have happened? I may have just been sad. I think people forgot that still exists in the world. And so I got to a breaking point with all of this and just said, look, I got to speak up. I may not have all the answers, but I've got different thoughts that may go against some of the grain that is out there. So, you know, that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the unlicensed counselor. Check out the website at theunlicenssedcounselor.com. Just got a little more background and information, a lot of the same stuff that you just